In the 70s, it was Led Zeppelin, Purple, Black Sabbath. Unfortunately, when musicians get together, it's done in a very innocent framework. You play your music and you think, oh, this would be nice to be heard on the radio.
Ritchie Blackmore has never been one for false modesty, nor for shallow praise. In interviews over the decades, his candour has often burned bridges faster than his fingers could blaze across a fretboard.
He was, as I said, an alpha guy, so was I. He wanted to control, I wanted to control, so we butted heads because of that. You know, we still respected each other, but we never got on, and we just couldn't be in the same room.
He has dismissed his peers, queried the value of adulation, and refused to soften his opinions for the sake of diplomacy. But ask him about Jimi Hendrix and the tone shifts.
That was based on Stone Free, Jimi Hendrix. I really liked his stuff.
The spikiness is replaced by something close to reverence. Not the saccharine reverence of the casual admirer, but the studied awe of a fellow master, one who understands just how difficult true greatness is to achieve. He had the music down, he had the composing down, he had the singing down, plus the showmanship, Blackmore once said. So nobody can compete with something like that. I don't think really anybody can come up to what he could do, because he could do everything. That was the thing that I thought was very interesting. For a guitarist who made his name challenging the boundaries of hard rock with Deep Purple and later Rainbow, Blackmore has always held himself to the higher standard. Technical skill, melodic creativity, harmonic complexity, he demanded it all. Hendrix, in his view, delivered it all, and then some. The irony, perhaps, is that Blackmore and Hendrix never truly crossed paths in any meaningful way. Their careers orbited the same period, their reputations grew concurrently, and yet their worlds barely touched. I saw him once at the Whiskey in Hollywood, Blackmore recalled. I went into the toilet and he was standing there looking in the mirror playing with his hair. We nodded to each other. That was it. A chance meeting in a club lavatory, two icons reduced to mere strangers for a moment. There were no late-night jam sessions, no debates about tone or tremolo. Hendrix, tragically, died in 1970 before the musical world had even begun to comprehend the scale of his talent. But the impression he left on Blackmore was indelible. It wasn't the man. It was the music. It's become something of a cliché to say Hendrix was ahead of his time, but Blackmore's assertion has always carried more weight because it comes with analysis, not just admiration. Hendrix's phrasing, his harmonic daring, his marriage of control and chaos, all of it set him apart. Hendrix came out in 1966, and he was probably 20 years ahead of his time, Blackmore said. What makes him a genius is his phrasing and his originality, his construction of songs, his very innovative riffs, like those of Purple Haze and Manic Depression, his presence on stage. It wasn't just the technique. Hendrix's use of studio effects, the way he layered tones to create immersive sonic landscapes, was transformative. Blackmore, who would later push his own guitar through tape delays and ring modulators, knew precisely how difficult it was to innovate in that way. Hendrix, he noted, made it seem effortless. Over the years, Blackmore has singled out several Hendrix tracks that left an especially strong impression. 4 in particular have risen above the rest, serving not only as personal favourites, but as lessons in musical architecture. The opening riff of Purple Haze is a cultural landmark in itself. Raw, jagged, slightly sinister, it uncoils with menace and momentum. Blackmore was struck by Hendrix's ability to turn what might seem like a wrong note into a stroke of genius. He had this incredible ability to play notes that sounded wrong at first, but then turned out to be absolutely right, he explained. He'd bend them into place with such confidence, and suddenly they'd sound perfect. The song's use of tritones, combined with fuzz-drenched overdrive and a flurry of controlled feedback, challenged the orthodoxy of what a riff could be. Blackmore, for whom precision was always paramount, admired Hendrix's ability to conjure beauty from the unorthodox. Manic Depression, written in a lilting 3/4 time, defies typical rock structures. The guitar work is fluid and off-center, spiraling around Mitch Mitchell's jazz-inspired drumming. For Blackmore, it was a masterclass in phrasing and restraint. It was never just about technical ability with Jimi, it was about the feel, the space between the notes, he said. He played like he had something urgent to say. The phrasing was unlike anything emerging from Britain at the time. Whereas British blues players borrowed heavily from the likes of Freddie King and Buddy Guy, Hendrix twisted the blues into something otherworldly. Blackmore took note.
You can't hold me down. I don't want to be down.
Hendrix's early track Stone Free, first released as the B-side to Hey Joe, is often overlooked in favour of his more anthemic works. But for Blackmore, it remains a landmark. Stone Free's solo is exceptional, he said. He always tuned his guitar half a step down, which helped him to have a very strong vibrato since the strings became looser. That half-step tuning, a common Hendrix quirk, gave his playing elasticity, a slightly slurred, deeply expressive voice. Blackmore too would come to favour alternate tunings, especially in his later folk-influenced work with Blackmore's Night.
Hey Joe, I heard you shot your woman down, you shot her down.
Of all Hendrix's songs, Hey Joe is perhaps the most surprising of Blackmore's favourites. Slow, sombre, almost ghostly, it is not a typical showpiece for a guitarist of Blackmore's reputation, but that perhaps is the point. When I need some stimulation, Hey Joe is the one that does it, Blackmore admitted, because I think with Jimi, he loved life, he loved to live, and it showed in his playing. I think if there are any comparisons to make, I think he is the rock and roll Errol Flynn. The comparison to Flynn is curious but apt. Hendrix, like Flynn, was a showman, but the show was never hollow. In Hey Joe, the sense of narrative, of descent, of danger, was matched only by the sheer grace of the execution. The Hendrix effect wasn't limited to admiration. It filtered directly into Blackmore's playing and into Deep Purple's music. The band's 1970 release In Rock was, by Blackmore's own admission, partially inspired by Hendrix's aggression, his fearlessness, and his melodic clarity.
In a way, from someone like Hendrix was a little bit more muted music, very, very musical, very bombastic, but and we kind of try to develop certain riffs that he had. You know, we did borrow from Hendrix a lot.
Songs like Speed King and Hard Lovin' Man had a ferocity that mirrored Hendrix's more frenetic work, but Blackmore always sought to underpin that with structure. Hendrix was the only player I've heard who could be that chaotic and still make it sing, Blackmore once said. Most people go wild, and it becomes noise. With him, it became music. It wasn't about copying. Hendrix wasn't a template. He was a kind of permission slip, a license to explore without fear of being misunderstood. That idea, perhaps more than any particular lick or chord, was what Blackmore absorbed. Even today, Blackmore places Hendrix on a different shelf than his contemporaries. "There are very few people in this business who have done something completely original," he said. "Jeff Beck did it in his own way, so did Clapton, but Jimi, he was a category unto himself." It's a sentiment that's echoed by other musicians of the era: Pete Townsend, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, all of whom recognized that Hendrix wasn't just good, he was different. While the British blues scene honed its chops in pubs and clubs, Hendrix arrived like a bolt of electricity. Blackmore is keen to stress that Hendrix's talent was not limited to the fretboard. In fact, one of the things he admired most was his voice. He never wanted to be a vocalist, Blackmore noted, but that's what made him great. There was something genuine in it. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. You believed him. It's a quality Blackmore has valued in all aspects of performance. Whether crafting medieval folk ballads or hammering through Rainbow's Stargazer, authenticity is his North Star. In Hendrix, he found a kindred spirit, not in style, but in attitude. Over half a century has passed since Hendrix's death, and yet his influence remains not only intact but growing. Blackmore, now in his late 70s, has mellowed with time, shifting from Stratocaster heroics to Renaissance folk with his wife Candice Knight. But even in his gentler moments, Hendrix's imprint remains. "You don't just hear a Hendrix riff," he said, "you feel it, in your bones." That's the difference. Notes can be played by anyone, but feeling, true feeling, is the domain of the few. Hendrix had it, Blackmore recognized it, and the rest of us still are catching up.